This hand of mine pops with an awesome power. Its burning cheese tells me to defeat you. Take this, my love, and all of my love! Hercules blow. This video is on a spoiler topic, discussing spoilery things about a character that only shows up in new content, so if you do not want spoilers for Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, or the other games in the Xenoblade series, because I may or may not be talking about those as well, I would highly advise not to watch this video. But if you do like my content, like and subscribe, or at least like and subscribe the ones that don't spoil you. Alright, Aloise Bernholt, the man, the myth, the dubiously legendary legend, and the popcorn spokesman there will never be because I don't know if any popcorn company still had advertising budget after Earth blew up. It's interesting to talk about him because, well, his role in the plot is so massive, but that much is largely driven just by his actions, not by his character. The lore stuff doesn't really directly involve him at all. He's just the guy who happened to be piloting the areas when all of this went down, and all things considered, he's not a particularly complex character. I wouldn't say he's not deep or nuanced, but he's just simple, and in a way I generally find to be good. I doubt this was some kind of planned thing involving 4D chess and all that, but I think it's really, really funny how the real-life reception to Al's character closely mirrors what Lynn said about him having trouble fitting in back on Earth. Remember, the only characters in universe who find How's It Poppin' funny are either people he was friends with since the days back on Earth, or people he'd been spending a lot of time with and had been able to befriend already on Mira. Other people like Tatsu and Gwyn don't understand the joke, which I think the point is that it's stupid and not funny at all, and they are more annoyed about the fact that they don't fit in and understand the inside joke that most of their friend group is on than they care about whether or not it's funny at all in the first place. It's mentioned multiple times that Al had a lot of trouble fitting in because of his sense of humor. Some people didn't understand it, some people found it annoying, and some people didn't get past it to understand the man behind it. Fascinatingly enough, that's more or less true in the real world. Al is not a universally liked character, largely because a lot of people don't vibe with his personality or his sense of humor, including How's It Poppin'. The other main reason people don't like him is because they think he upstages Elma and the other main characters of the original game's story, and I think he'd be upset and frustrated with himself that he comes off that way to so many people as well. Yeah, Al is annoyed at being the hero. He has heart-to-heart conversations about not liking people wanting to get his autograph or a handshake, and doesn't really like the idea of his coming back being propagandized and all that stuff. But this does not come from a lack of self-esteem, like is usually the case for characters like this. He's perfectly self-confident and steadfast in his abilities and beliefs. He's just realistic about when he's outmatched, which he clearly gets by Void multiple times during the epilogue, and also seems to just genuinely not think that he's that special. He is just some guy from Earth who loves the planet and its people, and even after she was lost, wants to protect the people who still survive. As far as he's concerned, he's not doing anything out of the ordinary, he's just doing what anyone should do in this situation. The only thing actually special about him is that he was one of the best pilots in the Coalition Air Force, which is the reason he was chosen to be a co-pilot of the Ares alongside Elma and eventually given the sole pilot role in the first place. Everything else out of the ordinary he does stems off of that and that alone. Oh, and while I do think there is some Jesus analog going on with him, it's not as heavily emphasized as other times this happens in the Xeno series. The only three real big points are he is 33 years old, he is presumed dead and returns spontaneously just in time for the apocalypse to happen, and he has a near universal love for everyone and everything that he tries to get other people to understand. If he's directly supposed to be anything other than just funny super robot man, then I think he's supposed to be a representation of what would happen if the American ideal was actually achieved on a regular basis. Like, he's the only real example of someone who shows off a positive aspect of the country throughout all versions of Xenoblade X. Think about it. He's a refugee who comes to the country fleeing war and ends up finding a place to belong. He finds friends, his own newfound family, and is capable of accepting anyone, be they from another country on Earth or even from a different world entirely. Because, yeah, I do think Al was one of the few people who knew Elma was actually an alien. I find it hard to believe that he would learn the ins and outs of piloting the Ares alongside her for so long without having been told at least that much. And then finds love for everyone and is able to not only use that to protect people, but also pass it on to someone like Cross, who's able to extend that love to all the people of Mira, which is why Al and the Ares chose them to fight Void in the final battle. While I could compare all of this to this fictional future version of the US actually living up to the ideals expressed on the Statue of Liberty plaque, I think there's a more concise way to say it. We're all the same, even if from another world. It's been under our nose since the original version of the game, guys. Another interesting thing to talk about is Al's original nationality. We know the battle with the Ganglion and Ghost on Earth took a little bit longer than it seems in the opening cutscene, but way before then, there was a war of humans fighting humans that seems to have led to the formation of the coalition government in the first place. And presumably, this is what caused Al to be displaced from his original home and come to America. Now, where did he come from? We really have to look at the timeline of it all. Al is 33, and he does not have the same moral conundrum all the Mimizome people do because he's in his organic body. So, because the game takes place in the year 2056, 2 years after the destruction of Earth in 2054, he must have been born in around 2023, which means he's like a toddler right now. We also know that he served in specifically the United States Air Force before joining the coalition government and the Skeleton Crew, where he met all of the other main characters. This means that he had to have both been old enough and cleared the necessary citizenship stuff to become a member of the US military prior to the formation of the coalition government. On the other side of things, he spent enough time in his home country to fully remember what his childhood there was like, and have ideas of what America was like prior to arriving. You also have to think about his younger sister. His relationship with Lyn is predicated on seeing her as a surrogate for his sister, just like how Lao viewed her as a surrogate for his daughter. In Lao's case, it's extremely likely that Lyn is not the same age his daughter would have been had she survived. Just based on math, if that were the case, Lao's daughter would have had to have been born when he was around 18, which is certainly still something that happens, but I don't think it was particularly common even back in 2015 when the first version of the game came out, and it's probably going to be even less likely when you get further into the future when this hypothetical Lao daughter would be born. From that, it seems like Lao views Lyn as the young woman he wishes his daughter would have been able to grow up into, not necessarily, this is literally how she would be if she'd survived. And that, I think, is pretty evident by the way he talks about her, especially during the beach scene in the epilogue, and even a little bit during the final battle. Al, on the other hand, it really seems like his sister either straight up would have been the same age as Lyn had she survived, or was about Lyn's age when they were first separated. The apparition of what presumably is her during the final cutscene is very obscured, so it's hard to tell exactly how old she's supposed to look, plus the fact that there are no young human children in Xenoblade X to begin with, so they'd probably have to base it off of Lyn's model no matter what, but I think it's not unreasonable to say that she was roughly 13 when Al last saw her. And if that's the case, he was probably at least 15 years old, which puts the date of him coming to America at 2038 or later. I am inclined to believe it was even later than that, probably into the mid-2040s, just so there was enough time for both Al to join the US military, meet all the other important characters he already knows, and fight with them on Earth before the coalition formed and they moved into the Skeleton Crew stuff and fighting against the aliens. And that lines up with Liesel being a few years younger than those other characters, while also being implied to not have actually fought in that war. Basically, this is so far in the future where it's not really reasonable to even guess where specifically he could be from. His name is very Germanic sounding, so Central or Eastern Europe is probably the best you can guess, though even that comes with the caveat that it can't be Germany itself, as we know Liesel's from there and it was seemingly in a pretty good state even up until the formation of the coalition. The other thing that really confuses me is the fact that his second Affinity mission heavily implies he never had pizza at all before coming to America. Not just that the pizza itself was better there. And like, where in Europe are you unable to get pizza, period? Between big American chains like Domino's and Pizza Hut, almost the entire continent is covered there, plus people can just open pizza restaurants besides that. You don't have to be Italian to do that, but even if that was necessary, actual Italy is right there, so I'm not quite sure how the whole pizza timeline thing works. You could argue that his family was poor and that's why only he was able to get out of the country safely, but there's no real implication of that. It seems like the only real hardship they encountered was the fact that there was a war going on. I don't know what to make of this, I guess. The only reason I bring any of this up is because Al as a character was not physically shown on screen until XDE, which released in 2025, so they might have intentionally changed his design to make his ethnicity something present-day relevant. Like, I have seen the theory that he is specifically supposed to be Ukrainian. There absolutely is merit to this kind of thinking, but I'm not sure we can, or Monolith wanted us to be able to narrow things down that specifically. The concept of the hero absolutely existed in the original version of Xenoblade X, and there are definitely enough breadcrumbs left behind to give a pretty clear indication that the hero's character was always supposed to be someone like Al. The only thing is, his name was never given in the original game, and the main design on the concept art page for the quote-unquote hero character appears to have been turned into Yelv instead, although in the corner you can still see something close to Al's final design. Couple this with a lot of Elma's Xenoblade 2 dialogue where she mentions an unnamed friend, who with hindsight is pretty clearly supposed to be Al, and I think most people thought this was going to be the hero guy even back in the day. The big contention point here is that she seems to imply that he was a big fan of either Japan or Japanese culture, which doesn't completely jive with Al being John Americana in XDE. It's in no way a contradiction with how he's portrayed in DE. It's not like we've known him for very long, maybe he just didn't feel like releasing his weeb side around us quite yet. But it does go to show that it seems like they did not have his name or ethnicity completely tied down, at least back in 2017. My headcanon for this is that Al was close with Nagi for a very long time, like going back to the original Air Force days, and maybe Nagi was like one of his original commanding officers or something like that, and that's where his main exposure to Japanese stuff came from. It's completely in character for someone like him to like anime or tokusatsu or something like that, but it really seems like his preferred form of media is specifically Hollywood sci-fi movies. What I'm trying to get at here is that the personality and general story role of the character who would become Aloise Bernhold clearly existed back when the original X came out. Specific details like his name, his final design, and his backstory may very well have been subject to change during the past decade, and only formally nailed down when they were writing the final script for Chapter 13. So saying they chose certain elements of that to be an analog to current events at the time is completely reasonable. I just don't know if being able to pin him down as being from somewhere specific is even the point. Al's backstory is there to reinforce the themes of things around characters like Lao. I can't really say it better than Niall did. With or without Mobius, people always kill people. There will always be pointless, stupid wars where the only thing that changes is that countless innocent lives are lost. Just because that keeps happening, though, doesn't mean literally every single human being on the planet is bad or that we deserve to be wiped out. While Lynn's childhood innocence and desire to make things better is obviously proof of that already, Al existing is that too. Despite his background, he's driven by an overwhelming love instead of hate or a desire for revenge that are some of the reasons Lao made the mistakes he did. Ultimately, Al is the poster child for the indomitable human spirit. That doesn't mean he's the only one to have that, or even that he's the best at it. I'd argue Cross is, at least at the final battle. But he is the most pure expression of it. Loving everything, even his enemy. Even the world itself. Even people who he doesn't know if they're even still with him. Fighting back against all odds, willing to self-sacrifice, and unintentionally even inspiring others to do the same when he can't be around. Humanity doesn't need specifically the great hero Aloise Bernhold anymore, because they are able to rise to the occasion just like he did on their own. He was simply the catalyst for everyone to begin striving towards the future, just as strongly as anyone from any other Xenoblade game. And it seems like this will to progress, to reach the future, to strive against adversity, some sort of will to power, perhaps, is something unique about X's humanity. It's obviously demonstrated in spades by the main cast of every other Xenoblade game, but as far as Elma seems to imply, humans are the best at this out of anyone, even other descendants of Samar like her own people. Speaking of the other Xenoblade games, I want to talk about Al's time in the Rift again, because this also leads to an exploration of his character as well. When the CGs of Al and the Ares in the Rift play, we, the player, see clips of all of the numbered Xenoblade games across the flying shards of glass. Does that mean Al himself saw those? I am inclined to believe that yes, he saw into many universes, probably many more than the 3 we see on screen, though I'm sure he did see at least parts of the numbered games, but I'm not fully sold on the 3 clips being exactly what he saw. The first is just the timeline weirdness. That will eventually get its own video. I just straight up do not understand the flow of time across different universes in Xeno, because it seems to contradict itself every single new game. The second is the fact that he was also being inundated with the overwhelming flow of consciousness from every universe, and I don't know how that would manifest itself visually. I don't know if that would just be seeing individual third-person scenes of events that none of the characters whose consciousnesses he might be experiencing would have directly witnessed in that specific way. Did he sense Shulk and Fiora's consciousness and maybe relive some sensations of that conversation at the bench in Outlook Park? Probably. But I don't think he physically saw the same cutscene that we got to see when we played through Xenoblade 1 ourselves. He probably got an overstimulating mix of all 5 senses as perceived by both Shulk and Fiora at the same time. Now imagine that, but he was also feeling every single thing everyone else in Colony 9 was feeling at the same time. And everyone in Colony 6, everyone on Mechonis, everyone from every single other universe nearby in the Rift. That being said though, are the specific clips we're shown relevant to anything other than proving that the other Xenoblade games exist in the same multiverse as X? I do think so. Remember, Al is all about love. Yeah, he says romantic love isn't the kind you need to pilot Ares, but it's still love. It's still a driving force for good when used in the right way. It can motivate you to improve, and also, therefore, improve the lives of those around you who care about you. And those are probably the moments he had to focus on to stay sane in the Rift. The fact that it was a sci-fi movie that gave him the idea to turn his brain off and stop perceiving everything lest he go insane is a lot more than just a throwaway gag for me. It's really the biggest piece of proof that despite its flaws, the epilogue did still ultimately spring from one of the minds who first created the Xeno series, and also was made from a place of love. This time, love for one's own craft and inspirations. Because Al is a massive sci-fi movie nerd, and so is Tetsuya Takahashi. And Xenoblade X as a whole was already a massive send-up to classic American sci-fi flicks. So making a prominent personality trait of Al also sharing that same element with his creator is just a further extension of that. If I could guess, older 20th century sci-fi movies were probably Al's first exposure to America and its culture, which is why he turned out to be the guy he is. He, despite immigrating in what was most likely his late teens, is the most stereotypical American guy in this entire cast. Except, despite being from the 2050s, he really does feel like a guy from a bygone era. One that will only feel even more outdated when it becomes 2054 in our real world. I think that more than anything is what makes him come off as sincere, despite being a kind of jarring shift from the game's general criticism of modern society and the US in particular. He's a super robot protagonist, but yeah, that also means he is more or less a hero from a classic popcorn flick, be it a sci-fi thing or a monster movie or something like that, with black and white morality, very little introspection, plopped into a modern, grounded sci-fi story. But also, it's a sci-fi story. Half of the reason the genre even exists is to use a speculative future as a lens to analyze the present day. So, he is still relevant, and is proof that, yeah, sometimes it is okay to just believe in people and trust that our ability to, in spite of everything, eventually make things better will win out in the end. All that being said, the only major piece of Al content that isn't directly required for this story is his second Affinity mission, which because of that was allowed to be played entirely as a joke, and as such, he does still get to crash out on an unassuming, underpaid, undeserving service worker like any true-blooded American patriot would when confronted with a mild inconvenience. Just so you know, whenever I've taken a potshot at the US like that in one of these videos, I've done a fake salute to fully emphasize the sarcasm in my voice, except I do it too hard every time and end up smacking myself in the face. This time I took a knuckle to the middle of the forehead, so hopefully that won't have a bruise tomorrow morning. Does that scene make me like him any less? No, not really. I know it just kind of turns a lot of people completely off his character, so it is what it is in that case. And I think the entire absurdism around the entire mission is enough for it to still be funny for me, even if the writing itself doesn't completely hit. It's just unfortunate that the pizza party scene at the end doesn't really do as good a job and isn't as tonally consistent with the main story as the required last meal before the final battle in the original Chapter 12 is. I would also just like to bring up again that Al making a joke about how far Blade has fallen in this mission is not some sort of plot hole or anything like that. He is just being sarcastic. He's been introduced to what Blade is supposed to be at this point in time, so he is still able to make jokes about that when a pizza store owner legitimately recommends commissioning the mediators to find cheese for him. Again, not intentional. The dialogue in the epilogue was not really written well enough for this to have possibly been on purpose, but people in the real world also have mixed opinions on Al's humor and don't quite understand it, causing some of them to dislike him. It's literally what Lynn describes as having happened in Universe 2. Another thing worth bringing up about Al is that while he doesn't like being the hero, his first heart-to-heart opens with him saying, "Remind me to dropkick whoever decided to put me up on this damn pedestal," he doesn't begrudgingly do heroic things. He's not in it for the money and actively dislikes the fame, but he will do good things because he understands he has the ability to protect people and that's the right thing to do. Yes, he is setting up Cross to be the next hero throughout the entirety of the epilogue, but they're specifically a contingency plan in case things don't work out with him. He fully intends to take full responsibility and do as much as possible himself so other people aren't in danger, and he does seem to acknowledge that he is the right kind of person that the hero needs to be. The reason he's drawn to Cross specifically as a potential successor, when you'd think that maybe Doug would be the reasonable choice from his point of view because he seems to be the second best pilot out of everyone and already knows Al well, is because Cross reminds Al of himself. And the thing is, his judgment isn't wrong. Cross isn't given a lot of characterization prior to DE content, but they still do seem to be someone perfectly willing to sacrifice themselves even in the original game. There are a few moments like that. Stepping in front of Lao to help protect Lin, protecting Tatsu in Chapter 5, and a few times in other missions and side content. I think as someone connected to the Ares in the way he is, let's put a pin in that for a minute, Al can see that Cross is the only one of these Mimiosomes who would be able to overcome the issue of not being in a flesh and blood body and still be able to pilot the Ares anyway. In his third heart-to-heart, you get the option to ask why you need to be biological to pilot the Ares in the first place. The response is just that no one was able to figure it out, but he has a hunch Ares simply prefers it that way and compares getting in the cockpit to being hugged by the machine, which would naturally prefer a warm body to a cold hard Mim. Cross's humanity is able to shine through the Mimiosome, and their warmth, their love for everyone and everything is enough to make Ares still accept them. Either that or the Mimiosome is Cross's natural body, so that was enough to count. It's actually a possibility I never thought about until now. Perhaps I'm not quite giving him enough credit because an earlier dialogue option in the same heart-to-heart has you choose between whether you prefer a Mimiosome or a flesh and blood body, and he actually does give pretty detailed and nuanced answers to both of them, mentioning that Mimiosomes can more or less last forever as long as you're able to repair them, but also saying that philosophically, the ship of Theseus applies. You don't really know if you are human without a physical body. Now, the answer Elma and everyone else seems to arrive at in the final part of the epilogue is that yes, it is your soul that makes you human, but Al was thinking about this, even though he gave the floor to Elma to actually make that speech, so I guess he does think a bit deeper than some people realize, even if the goofy personality he displays is genuinely not a front. Like, that's not masking any trauma or anything, he is just like that, and I think it's much better that he is that way. I know a lot of people do still dislike him for allegedly hijacking the plot, but think about it. If this long built-up hero man showed up in Chapter 13 and ended up actually being this super cool, amazing pilot, better than everyone else at literally everything, and did completely take over the show and was the only important relevant character to the story, he'd probably be completely insufferable. But instead, nope, he is just some guy, and that is all he wants to be. The entire concept of finding your place, the one where you feel the most at home, and where the people you surround yourself with are your family, is really a quick summation of a lot of the major themes of Xenoblade 3, which is of course very fitting because that allows him to rather quickly completely dismantle Void's entire point of view with one speech because, you know, Void has a lot of similar philosophy to Zed. Elma and especially Lynn do get a few moments, but I do think the big thing Al actually does in the story is be a contrast to Void. Loving life so much you're willing to give yours up to protect those of others, versus causing as much death as possible in order to try and fully understand the phenomenon. It's not particularly complex, but it doesn't really need to be for something as long as the epilogue that also asks a lot bigger questions too. Before we end, I want to quickly talk about Al's heart-to-hearts, because there are a few interesting things in there. The premise of the first one is that he's running away from fans. He even says, like, what am I, a Hollywood star? Because he's a guy who really likes Hollywood movies. But this also confirms that I was completely wrong about something in the initial epilogue video. Al was not in the rift for only a few days. He directly says, I was drifting for months through the vastness of space. Where's my reward for that? Can I not get a little sympathy? On that note, hang out with me, will you? There's only so much alone time a guy can endure. This also does speak a bit about his character. I wouldn't say he's afraid of it, but he really dislikes being alone. It might just be because of his personality, but I think due to his experiences, and especially after mingling with Void a little bit, he just needs to be around other people to feel grounded and probably even still feel human. He got mixed with both Void and the Ares in the Rift, and I have to imagine one of his greatest fears is actually becoming something other than just some guy. So that's why he sticks so closely to his friends and all that. This is also the heart-to-heart where he mentions that he's apparently won Doug's clothing in poker matches multiple times in the past, and he also compares Cross's exploits to old-school Hollywood blockbusters, which I think is really cute because so many side stories are affectionate parodies of a lot of old classic sci-fi Hollywood blockbusters. He also teases Elma multiple times in that heart-to-heart, and honestly, it is kind of a shame we don't see more of their conversations on screen. The second heart-to-heart is just him talking about cars, fulfilling the prophecy in one of Elma's heart-to-hearts from the original game, and it's just kind of funny watching him geek out about things. He does confirm that Earth did fully switch over to electric vehicles at some point before its destruction, which is kind of neat, I guess, and then also makes a very similar Ship of Theseus argument to the one he makes in the third heart-to-heart, where he says that even if they used life-haul data to recreate a classic car, it wouldn't be the same as actually driving one that's been around for all that time. He also specifically mentions going on joyrides up and down the Pacific coast in his old car back on Earth, which suggests to me that at least he did live in the original Los Angeles prior to the Ark ship being created. We get a bit more NLA lore here too, where he says that they limit the amount of driver's licenses in order to reduce traffic, which is funny because that seems to also imply that something from one of the short stories is still canon, which says that a lot of the cars you see on the streets are holographic to make the city seem more lived in, but the actual amount of physical cars is kept low so you don't get the kind of traffic you'd usually see in a city. Yes, there is actually a justification for the cars having no collision, although it shouldn't be all of them, and it was definitely a gameplay and resource-saving situation before it was any of that. You get the option to suggest that he take a road trip in a vehicle mode Skell, which is funny, one, because his is like one of two that doesn't transform into one of those, and two, because he immediately extends that into a Transmirrant coast-to-coast pan-continental rally tour, which just makes me want there to be a proper racing minigame with vehicle Skells in whatever the next X game is. Alright, time to remove that pin, because we kind of glossed over so far the fact that Al was mixed with Void in the Rift and then also became somehow an important component to the Ares still being able to function. The Void part is a lot easier to explain. Ares and Ouroboros from Xenoblade 3 work similarly. It was probably something similar to interlinking. We know Al saw Void's memories, so yeah, basically the same thing. The interesting part though is the Ares mixing going on. And that is because the Ares was either replicating the powers of the conduit or literally the distilled conduit from Void's world. This makes Al the Xenoblade X version of the Contact, which you're not super likely to be familiar with because that's something that's only mentioned by name in Xenogears, though every single Xeno game has some sort of equivalent to it. In Gears, the Contact is someone who has a special connection to that game's version of the Zohar. Depending on how awakened you are as the Contact, it might just begin as a power boost, but it eventually can lead to being able to use the powers of the Zohar in a much greater and more reality-warping way than anyone else could. There's an equivalent to this in Saga, but in the numbered Xenoblade games, it's been pretty different so far. In Gears and Saga, you generally need some kind of machine to interface properly with the Zohar, but in the numbered games, that machine itself is sentient. being the Trinity processor units. So anyone who isn't one of them with strong ties to the conduit really isn't the contact, because the contact is the medium people use to interface with its power. This includes everyone from Xenoblade 1 except Aloise, everyone from Xenoblade 2 except the Architect Klaus, who is different from Zanza. Zanza is still using the conduit's power through Ontos. However, the Architect Klaus is intrinsically tied to the conduit, as part of his body was brought through it to the world of Xenoblade 1, and it existing in the first low orbit station is tied to his life force. This extends to Xenoblade 3 as well, and actually does cover literally everyone in that game. Not only is the conduit gone, but Origin is primarily based on the structure of the Ontos processor and not literally running on Ontos. And even though Logos and Numa do show up, it's actually specifically the souls of Pyra, Mithra, and Malos in Origin granting power to individuals through Origin Metal, and not the power of their Trinity processor cores directly. Al bucks this trend. Whether or not the Ares is the original Sumerian conduit or not, and that is still up in the air, I've seen more evidence to suggest it might be, even though I personally don't believe that, Al is intrinsically tied to its systems. Ares does not work without him, and he seems to have been fundamentally changed in some way by his connection to it. Cross is able to use Ares more effectively than he is, but they still did need him in the cockpit to make it work in the first place, so if anything, Al has now become the Trinity processor to the conduit juice located in the Ares cores. This means no matter what, he's going to be a shoo-in to appear in any future game that follows up on the ending of the epilogue, as Ares is now the only remaining source of conduit-type energy that we know the whereabouts of in the entire series. It seems like the Trinity cores were still able to do a decent amount of work in Ionios without access to the conduit, but even then, Ares seems like it's capable of doing more than even Origin as a whole could, and that's very, very impressive. Well, yes, the White Whale 2 is almost certainly going to stop using the Ares cores now that they're in this new universe, because that would risk calling the ghosts back. I'm pretty sure ghosts showing up again in a future entry is more than inevitable, so they're probably going to have to run the risk of, alright, they're already here, we have to use the Ares to get a better fighting chance, and regardless of who's in the pilot seat, Al still needs to be in the cockpit to make it work. Something also tells me that his role as an exposition dispenser is not completely done yet. He did not tell everyone else about Void's past on screen at the very least, only relaying that to the player in narration, so there's probably a few things he saw in the Rift that he hasn't told anybody at all yet, simply because they weren't relevant at the time. Maybe a while after getting settled in on the new planet, everyone grilled him for more details and he did spill everything he knows. But even then, he could just give the exposition to someone who wouldn't have been there to grill him. Like, there's a very good chance he will end up detailing the structure of the multiverse to someone from the combined world at the end of Xenoblade 3 down the line, regardless of whether or not the planet at the end of Chapter 13 is the one from Future Redeemed, just because they don't have as much information on the overall cosmology as anyone from Xenoblade X does now. X has the knowledge, X has the power, X arguably has the societal stability over post-Future Redeemed Earth, because that still has to deal with the ramifications of two worlds coming together, while everyone on Mira had already been easing their societies together and smoothing over tensions, so even though they had to relocate to a brand new world, they're going to be able to rebuild in a lot more harmony than if they'd gotten all ported to this new world right after the White Whale 1 landed on Mira. Something tells me that, yeah, maybe the very next game is not going to follow up on the ending of XDE, but whenever we next see ghosts, we are going to see Al, the Ares, and probably a few other skells pop out of a rift-like portal to come and save the day, because, well, the ghosts are in this universe, you might as well use the Ares and use its abilities to bend space-time to bring people in to potentially save more lives, because Al, he's gonna love people he hasn't even met yet. And I hope that's one thing about him that never changes. Until next time, this is Luxon, signing off.